Okay, this is Penny from Wisconsin Land and Water, and thank you everyone for joining us. We have 191 people coming on right now, and thank you for attending the conference, everyone. So we have an hour for this session. We're going to do 3 different presentations, and they are going to be in this order. We're going to have Dane County first, then Outagamie County, and then we'll end up with Douglas County. Each county will give a presentation for about 15 minutes. And then we'll answer the questions that you send into the chat. So anytime that you have a question, just send it into the chat. And then when they're done with other presentations, Tony's going to read those to them. And then we'll move on to the next presentation. And Ashley has the CEU QR code in her presentation. So we'll put that up at the end so you can get that. And it's being recorded. And I think we're ready to go. So Marie and Chelsea, ready to go?
You bet.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks, Penny.
Great, thank you.
We're excited to be here today and talk about one of the producer-led groups in Dane County that we call the BFFs, so the Biological Farmer Friends. And I guess, you know, we felt strongly when we were creating this group that we wanted to do things a little differently. So instead of doing conventional cost share, we actually use our funds to cover 5 larger scale demonstrations to try to kind of show the feasibility of these practices on a large landscape, you know, and take advantage of the funds that we have for cost share other places. So today we're just going to talk about 3 of our farmers and how they, you know, innovatively fit cover crops into their rotation. So we're kind of using some slides from the cover crop conference last week in terms of like myth busting and easy ways to integrate cover crops.
All right. So at the cover crop conference, we started with fitting cover crops into your rotation. It won't kill you. And I think that was like a really good theme for anyone who was at the cover crop conference. I think almost every speaker kind of was like, this isn't going to kill you. And so I felt like that was a good way to start it. Let's see if we can get it to move forward. It worked before.
Do you have your mouse on the screen that you're working on? You have 2 screens?
Oh, there we go. It's just going to take, 17 seconds between me hitting the button. Anyway, I think like gateway drugs, everybody's kind of got a gateway cover crop. For the BFF group, we're located in the Southern Yahara watershed. So think like Stoughton, south of Madison, Oregon. It's a big focus area for the sewage district, obviously, because Madison kind of drains through there. But for all of these farmers, really the first cover crop they experimented with and how they applied it was flying on barley back in like 2016, and it was kind of a disaster. It didn't really take, and from then on they've really tried to up it every year. So after 2016 didn't work with barley, they moved on to flying rye in 2017, which worked a lot better. And then I think low-hanging fruit for most people is going to be the picture on the right, which is going to be a cover crop after a small grain like a winter wheat. So those were kind of the 2 gateways, and then we've just moved on from there. All right, so we thought we'd just go through a couple really standard rotations from 3, I'd say, different types of farms. Carl Syme and his family run about 800 acres, and they are used to be a dairy until 2018. So when they started cover cropping, they were still milking about 220 cows. Since then, they've sold the cows, but they've moved and they finish about 250 steers in their freestall. And then they have a 60 cow-calf beef herd that they also manage. So this farm produces forages and then cash grain. In the pictures, we kind of tried to do a little time lapse. We've got Carl, he modified a Great Plains drill a few years ago and made it an interseeder. So he's interseeding some 60-inch corn. You can kind of see if you move to the right what that looked like. That's probably we're at September or October, kind of later in the season, how much forage we grew after snaplage was taken. So one of the things the Symes do that's a little bit A little bit different is instead of silage, they harvest snaplage, which is when you take the entire ear and grind it up. And then you can see the cows out on that later in the season. So that's one of their, I'd say, cash grain rotations that they also integrate livestock on. One of their goals is to integrate livestock pretty much on the entire farm when possible. They also grow some annual forage crops, which allow for cover cropping. Sorghum Sudan, followed, interseeded with a clover, and then followed by like a cereal rye for the following year. And we always ask Carl, like, why are you doing this? So for the most part, they grow a lot of forage with cover crops. I remember I think May 15th of 2021, Carl called and he said he was done putting up feed for the year because he had provided all the feed he needed for his herd in cover crops, which is pretty cool. They raise that many cattle and don't grow any alfalfa, which is definitely an interesting rotation and an interesting way to raise cattle. He does do a lot of custom work, so he's able to take his baler and do work for all the neighbors, and it doesn't interfere with his own because he's done before the cash grain season starts. The other thing Symes do is they do have a roller crimper, and so they are experimenting with weed suppression with cover crops, and then of course, like everyone else, they're looking to reduce fertilizer inputs as well as any kind of herbicide inputs. That's always the trick with all of these rotations is what's your herbicide plan and your herbicide schedule, because a lot of things like triple flex, which is the one that we ran into, has a lot of soil activity, and so really we shouldn't be interseeding into that. So that's our first example. We'll hopefully move on here. So First Seth Farms is a pretty big player down in the southern watershed. They farm, I think, just shy of 4,000 acres. They also have a dairy, and so it's a pretty multifaceted farm. But I think what's great about First Seth is they can really show that the myth that you can't fit cover crops into a corn soy rotation, they've blown that one out of the water pretty good. So they have gone to, and we'll show an example of it, of how they seed all their cover crops, but they're in a position at this point that they can cover crop every acre and then plant green going forward on everything, which is a pretty exciting thing for a 4,000 acre farm to be striving to do. They do have a dairy. It's only 200 cows, so it's obviously not going to be, not every acre that they farm sees manure or is in a hay dairy rotation. They have a lot of just straight cash grain rotations on their acres. They do use some of their cover crops, which is mainly a cereal rye for forage, but they're also looking for that early season weed suppression. They're looking to cut back on that first pass, or I should say second pass herbicide use. Like everyone, they're doing some no nitrogen strips and trying to figure out some better nitrogen cycling. And then they are, in this picture, you can kind of see, this is one of their fields, but right where that car is coming towards us in the photo, there's a culvert that runs from the field into Mud Lake. I think that's Mud Lake. I'm probably getting the lake name wrong. It's a little lake down in Stoughton. There's a bunch of them. So I think that's exactly what we want to see in early spring, is a green field above a culvert. So I feel like that was just a good example of, trying to reduce nutrient load into surface water.
Yep, and our last farm we'll talk about today is Kevin Opperman of Highland Springs Cattle, and he direct markets beef and sweet corn. And they have a pasture-based system, but the sweet corn really gives them, some more time in the fall to get unique species mixtures planted. And he has the cattle to utilize it, and then that manure can provide nutrients to the when they go back to sweet corn. So his goal is pretty much for forage, and in these species mixtures, it's sorghum Sudan, and
he throws a bunch of clovers and kind of all sorts of stuff depending on how early the sweet corn comes off.
Yep, and these two pictures are just illustrating the importance of timing on grazing cover crops. And you can see this upper right one, you get he got in there a little earlier and it's more vegetative and, better quality and more palatable to the cattle versus this lower picture. They still did a pretty good job, but there's certainly quite a few stalks left over. And it is difficult with Kevin and sweet corn to figure out herbicides. So, I think he's really interested in, can we get enough cover crop biomass to help suppress some of the weeds, since herbicide options are limited in a sweet corn year. Anything I missed?
No, I mean, he gets a lot of, he does put up a lot of winter feed off of cover crop and annual forage mixes. His farm's pretty green all year round because of that, which is nice. And it does give him a boost on winter feed for sure. He can grow a lot of tonnage.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, that he doesn't just depend on the pasture. He sees this as an important diversity option.
Right. And the sweet corn, and anyone who's doing like kind of a specialty crop, he's resting those acres every other year, but that's not giving up. He's obviously not going to put it into permanent pasture. So he's got about 45 acres that he's rotating through sweet corn. So that's a lot of forage you can grow when the sweet corn isn't there. And he's definitely taking advantage of it. All right. So one of the main questions everyone asks us is, how do you plant these things and when? So timing methods. There's a few different timing methods. We all know we can wait until the main crop is harvested, run a drill behind the combine. You can plant it. There's a few guys running buggies, obviously, like trying to broadcast when they put on potash in the fall. There's always right before harvest. So, how a lot of this group started was Damon Reeby from Dairyland Aviation. And I'm going to check my time. We're going to have to hurry. Came down and flew rye on, which just gives that cover crop just a little bit of a jump. Especially if you can get a little bit of rain after that comes. So that is the riskiest of all. That's like you kind of dig down in your toolbox at the end of the year. And if you can't get your cover crop on another way, you fly it on. We showed Carl Syme with his modified drill for interseeding. We have a few guys experimenting with putting like red clover right in the winter wheat box, mixing it all up. That way, when they plant their winter wheat in the fall, the red clover is right there coming on in the spring. So far, that hasn't been a disaster, but time will tell. And then I think we haven't done a lot of this, but I know there's examples of flying cover crops on kind of this time of year, if for some reason you couldn't get stuff on in the fall. So I think there's a ton of options, and just making sure producers have all those tools in their toolbox, so that if something's not working, if it's too wet, they can go ahead and get maybe a pilot to come on or do something in the spring. All is not lost due to weather.
And just one last point, I think too, they don't worry necessarily if the rye hasn't come up in December. We get warm days, in February, and as long as, we have something during snow melt or even early spring, that's still providing a benefit, and they think there's value in that.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to show a video. This is in 60-inch corn, but he also uses it in 30-inch corn. And this is kind of indicating you don't necessarily need new equipment all the time to try new practices. So this is probably mid to late June. And research has shown we're getting a lot more success in biomass if we interseed earlier, V3 versus at one time, I think, people were talking about V6 corn.
Yeah, and it established well. It was a good year. Also, he planted that 60-inch corn and he really bumped. Obviously went to like a 65,000 plant population. And this year, because of the drought, we saw a hit on 60-inch corn, but previous year we didn't see a hit. So it goes back to the old, you tell us the weather and we can tell you what to plant, but it's pretty tough to predict how some of these systems are going to work. So I think, for Carl, I think he did like 25 acres of 60-inch maybe. So he's not like all in on it. It's important to try, a few acres. Oh, it's going to do that. How do I get it to go forward? There we go. Okay. So this is First Set Farms. This is that bigger farm. And they, after their first year of flying on cover crops, they thought it was great, but they didn't want to they didn't want to rely on a pilot and rely on good rain. And so they invested in putting basically an air seeder on the back of their vertical till. And you will see that here. And they run over, they've really focused on their corn acres, getting their corn acres seeded. I know the quality of that video isn't great, but you get the point. Because they love planting soybeans green, like that was their first in. They planted them green a couple years ago and have not looked back since. And now what they're doing is and we'll get into it later, hopefully if we have time, is modified some equipment to plant corn green. Here's a plane. Everyone's probably seen this, but everyone likes a good plane video, maybe. There's Damon. Gosh, he gets low. That's okay. So anyway, we'll just keep moving because we're going to run out of time otherwise. You want to talk about how we kill it?
Yeah, so I think some of the great things about grass cover crops are you have options. I think a lot of people feel like they're locked in. If they planted rye, they have to go through this XYZ plan they have had laid out. But I think the group has really shown that you can be adaptable and have options. So on the left here, we have, part of a field that was terminated chemically and the other half was being planted green.
Yep.
So experimenting.
On the right is a planted green field. Soybeans are in that field. Came back later and sprayed it. That might have actually, looks like it's browning up. So he might have already sprayed that. I just want to quick go through, nothing's quick apparently. We've got roller crimper, we've got forage, all different ways that you can terminate. And then of course you can always just graze it off. Lots of different options for terminating. And this was that, I know I have not a lot of time for questions, but it looks like there's only 2. So I'm going to keep talking for a minute. This was something that First are putting on their planter for this year. It's going to give them a little bit better closure on their furrow when they're planting their corn green into standing rye. So that's something that they invested in. It's modifying existing equipment. It is not buying anything new. Roller crimper, everyone's seen that. So we'll just try to keep moving. Maybe, maybe not.
Click again, maybe.
Okay. There we go. And finally, just, why these guys are doing it. They're in it for soil health for sure. But I also think this group, the BFF group, we named it, you pick the acronym first and figure out the word second. And it's because these guys it's a group of young farmers and they're all friends and they push each other and egg each other on. And anyway, we'll stop for questions. We talk too much, so.
Okay, we do have one question. It's from Zach in Fond du Lac, and this question came in during your Carl example. He asked, do you know the species rates estimated planting date on the mix between the 60-inch corn?
Yeah, that's a good question, Zach. We've tried quite a few things. We've tried, Carl tried just Italian ryegrass straight, and then this year it was, a 20 species mix. Normally always planted 3rd week of June, I would say. And at least the multi-species mix was, 20 pounds an acre, I would say, somewhere around there.
And then he also, and 3 of our farmers participated in that Aaron Silva interseeding study this year. So that data is out in the world. And Ann Pfeiffer had, I think, 3 different mixes that she was looking at. So those mixes I think those were like 10-way mixes or so.
Yeah, I guess I think for interseeding, right, it depends if you're going to graze it or not on what species you want to put in. And it's certainly easier to have weed control if you only have broadleaves or if you only have grasses. And then the cost obviously changes the more species you have in there. So I think really just think about what your goal is. And, I would say, like, if you have a bunch of brassicas, you maybe only need 1 from each category to still have that benefit. We see the question about crimping.
This was done, Well, okay, so on Carl's equipment, again, it all depends on your equipment. His corn planter, he modified his corn planter and added a Dawn in-row roller crimping unit. So planting is done at the time of crimping. For soybeans, when he crimps his soybean acres, he has a McFarland front-mounted roller. So that's also being rolled as it's being planted behind the roller. So everything he does is crimping and planting at the same time.
And I guess, we like the idea of crimping and planting at the same time because you're saving a pass, but obviously in organic agriculture, they normally plant soybeans and then crimp. So if you're willing to wait to plant later, that's an option.
Right. I mean, you take a hit if you have to wait for that rye to pollen before you can crimp it. Steve Richter across Wisconsin.
All right.
Okay, were we done? Can I avoid Steve Richter's question? Is that what you're telling me?
You
Well,
can do
it's
Steve's.
11:20, so actually, if you could respond in the chat to him, that would be great.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was great. Yes, and please respond. And if you have any more questions for them, they'll, I think, be here with us for a little bit, right? You'll be here, Chelsea and Marie. Okay, great. And let's get Jeremy ready to go. So Jeremy from Outagamie County is going to be doing his presentation. Get him spotlighted.
We look good, Penny.
You're looking good.
All
Okay. Okay, let's go.
Thanks for the short intro. I'm going to need all the time I can have. Real quick, I guess, giving an update on the ARTS, Ag Runoff Treatment Systems. We've introduced this to this group over the years. We finally have 3 years of data from the Great Lakes Restoration Grant that we had through EPA through Foxwolf. So I'm going to do what I can to relay the information I got from Dr. Firmenich from GB, along with Paul Renault and Paul Baumgartner, the heavy lifters that did, collected the samples, did the numbers. Looks like I have the same delay, so you have to anticipate it, huh? All right. So the concept again, real quick for those, essentially, we're using technical standards, but you start with the local issues. Like, what are you trying to address? Climate change, flooding, water quality, stream bank erosion through peak discharge issues, lost water storage. We heard that a lot yesterday. Basically, we're creating storage of water and then we're treating it and deciding how fast to release it. The technical standards that we're using with this grant out of the gates that's going to show up in this data is sediment basin 350 and constructed wetland 656, both doing what we know they do. And then you end up with solutions. So you have better water quality. You might mitigate floods without spending money on infrastructure downstream. You might stabilize stream banks without, again, spending money downstream. And then you also recreate habitat. And I think we're going to get access to wetland restorations. At the end, we'll talk about how we're sliding in a new technical standard into this based on what we learned from the data, the P remove device. So this is an oblique photo of the HOV ARTS system. Most of the data today is from the Lamers ARTS system, but it's the same concept. You have a cropland watershed with a subsurface drain tile network underneath it. We have monitoring equipment at the beginning that looks at the total P, total N, TSS, and all water drops that come off the edge of field through both surface and drain tile. The water goes through a sediment forebay. We spread it out with the gravel spreader bar. Treatment wetland cell number 1 gets to grow and do its thing. After 100 feet, we apply VTA standard and say, hey, water's got to spread back out again so it doesn't channelize and short circuit. We do another wetland cell, and then we decided to do a sediment trap at the end. And then you have a regular outlet that's designed for the storm events. The bottom of the map, you'll see the existing natural wetlands. Essentially, that's where the farmer is going to let you do this. This one was constructed within the grass waterway that existed that had a half-acre footprint, and the total footprint that you see of the treatment is about an acre. So really, you're taking another half-acre out of production. This site is set up as a showcase site, so the fields got squared up and a parking lot and all that stuff got put in as well. So anybody that wants a tour, reach out. Happy to walk you through the real event. So the first thing is the runoff. Runoff causes all our issues, right? We lost water storage from wetlands lost. Orange is what comes off the edge of field and the surface. Very flashy, very fast, and it's over right away. The blue or the gray, I'm sorry, is the tile discharge. There's a little delay till the tile starts flowing, and they kind of flows over the course of 3 to 4 days. And the blue is what leaves. So we're attenuating the flood. Basically, it comes in hot and fast, and everything underneath the blue is what we're storing and letting out very slowly. What you'll see in this data too is it takes almost 5 days to let the water out, and that's important because that's what the wetland plants need to pretend that they're a wetland. And so that's the hydraulic piece that is added. So we're not going to get into each one of these dots and what it represents, but basically the blue is what comes from the surface, and the triangles is what comes from the tile, and the gray circles is what leaves. And what's really important is it comes in high and it leaves close to zero. Is like, I think what again, we have all this data, and it could take hours to go through what each chart is telling us and what storm event is telling us, because they're all different. One thing that's becoming more of a concern to a lot of folks is like the dissolved phosphorus component of our runoff. And I would argue it's a concern with Ohio with their no-till systems. It's a concern with natural wetlands. So it's expected that it would be a concern with a treatment wetland as well. But what's important on the top left, I've circled the scale. Like the max concentration of dissolved P is 0.6 milligrams per liter, when during the storm events, it's like 10 milligrams per liter for total phosphorus. And so I think the science world is still figuring out like how fast does it take total P to convert to dissolved P and all those different components. But we set this up from day one to be a trapping device and not an absorption device. We wanted to see what we could do cheap and dirty. So here's your annual loads. So these are all paired together. So each pair goes together. So what comes into the system goes out. So you have dissolved phosphorus first. The next two are your total phosphorus, your suspended sediments, and then your particulate phosphorus on the right. And we'll focus on the sediment for this slide. Basically, what's kind of neat, because you're using the settling equation, you have the same water, source area each time. No matter how much load you have, you end up with the same amount of discharge. That's basically telling you it's settling to your equation, and it can't settle beyond that, and you wouldn't expect it to be able to. So, but what's important is it's higher on the left and lower on the right in all situations except for dissolved P after 3 years of data. Now diving into the phosphorus piece, here's the variation that you'll see of phosphorus based on water year. So 2017, 2018 were large storm events, same amount of rain, but it came fast, it came hard. It was 25-year events, 100-year events. Particulate P drives the total P for the year. Go to 2019, it rained every other day for nonstop until middle of July. Dissolved P becomes, the bigger piece of what's coming off the landscape. So when you compare what comes off the edge of field and what leaves the treatment device, the difference is your percent reduction. I think what's really important here is this is every drop of water that ran off. So for a 25-year rain event, 100-year rain event, we got 80% of the total TSS. Urban stormwater through like DNR rules for development, you're looking at the 1 and 2 year storm and trying to get 80% of that. So it's going to be a key step is to create apples to apples. So perhaps this 80% is closer to a 95% TSS when comparing on that level. Particulate P is very high because you're settling it, right? Settling's high, so you expect that. Total P, some years we're hitting 70%. On the really wet year, it failed. We only have 3 years of data. I don't think it's fair to say it's a 45% efficient BMP. And like I said, it's going to be key to sort that out, because once you get more years, you'll get more, obviously different reductions, so that number will go up or down. And then on the left, DP, some years when it's below the graph, that means it's losing it. But again, this isn't percent. So if you're only losing 1 pound, a 40% gain is only 0.4 pounds, just for scale. So what causes this DP? It's based on what you do in the landscape. So here's an example of 2019. The green arrows are 2 different surface applications of manure at a low rate on a growing hayfield. A week later, we had a rain event in both cases. And in both cases, the DP was greater than 80% of what phosphorus was trapped in the ARTS system. Flash forward 2 months, we do full incorporation, bury the manure with fall tillage. We have some crazy events in November and December, and up to 9 milligrams per liter P concentration. But now only 40% of the P is in dissolved P. So again, like each storm is different based on the practice you're doing to the land. So now looking just at the dissolved P piece with your same arrows showing the the surface application manure and the tile manure, basically, or tilled manure. It's basically, there's a direct correlation to rainfall events, manure applications, and P runoff. Shouldn't be a surprise. What's a surprise a little bit is how much dissolved P, once it's had a chance to sit over the winter, runs off in early March as the snow starts to melt. So my last kind of chart on phosphorus, but basically the top is the different storm events for the same period of time we're talking about with the applications. So you can see the hydrographs above of how much runoff we have. The second event is 1 million gallons of water that was trapped and treated through the device, just for an example of scale, off of 20 acres of ag land. We look at that bottom chart, and what we're looking at is cumulative phosphorus loss. The red, solid red and blue are the total phosphorus in and dissolved phosphorus in, respectively. The dashed lines are corresponding measured outflow from the systems. And so what's important to see is, even though we had the wettest spring, early summer of record, coming off a hayfield, you only had about 1 pound of P cumulatively up until July. But then we started applying manure, and then every time, so you apply manure in the green arrow, you look above, we have a rain event, and then it bumps up. And this is cumulative. By the end of the year, we had 7 pounds per acre of P loss at the edge of field. And what's, I guess, still important to see, though, the dash line only allowed 3 to leave the system. So if we didn't have the system in place, we would have lost a lot more phosphorus. And last chart for today, cumulative TSS and phosphorus. But basically, as the year goes on, this is how it accumulates towards the end. But what's key here is the black line. It shows that your efficiencies of like trapping sediment and phosphorus changes throughout the year. So when you have early spring snowmelt, you're only getting like 50% of the TSS, but that's might be less than 1% of the total load of the year. So it just kind of shows you efficiencies change. This is the first time we're seeing any of this data, and so now we're going to be able to adapt. What's another source? Natural plants. I mean, natural wetlands do this. When they senesce in the fall, that phosphorus that it used to grow goes back into potentially can go into the runoff in our streams. Same thing with cover crops that die. So we did want to see how much the natural plants, I mean, these wetlands do a good job of growing biomass. So we cleaned it out, and we don't have final results in the water chemistry, but we do know through the lab tissue analysis that we estimate about 2 pounds of dissolved phosphorus was taken up by the wetland plants. And 2 pounds out of a total of 10 in the surface water runoff is a pretty significant number. So potentially that's going to inform our operations and maintenance, that if we have a significant phosphorus problem or a high loading phosphorus, that we're going to need to harvest the vegetation at the end or throughout the year, just helping to inform us if we're trying to get to 0 with this TMDL. Another metric that TNC helped us out with is just looking at, hey, this used to be tilled ground that grew corn and soybeans, and now we have a half acre of this. And then how many frogs, how many different dragonflies are migrating out of the natural wetlands adjacent and using this system as part of their home. And those numbers look really impressive as well. So in summary, this is kind of Kevin's notes. Basically, over 80% of our load comes in 5 to 10 days a year. So thinking of climate change, thinking of the things we do, I mean, we got to keep the ground covered no matter what time of the year it rains. We have a changing hydroclimate, so we're going to have additional challenge where we're going to need a cover cropping system probably to work with these type of systems. They met our project goals, and I think we're trying to look at the dissolved P piece in the lower Fox. It's becoming more of a focus. At what point does the legacy P in the field leak, or how, what's that max number? And the nitrogen data, I don't have any data from the researchers yet on that, but we do have the nitrogen information. So anybody that's interested in that, this should be a good practice where you can, using those constructed wetlands, you're going to be mitigating nitrogen losses as well. So our next steps. So for the flow, we did this land use study of where our water storage is missing. People probably have seen us present on that, but now we have maps that indicate where our greatest amount of water storage needs to go to get our streams back to their meadow condition, if you will, to stop erosion. The purple lines on here are priority stream bank restorations. That's miles, tens of miles of stream bank that would need to be fixed. So we're looking at storing water up in these headwaters and these red watersheds to not have to do that work. With the device itself, happily, this now became a part of the USGS system. So we're going to start looking at like, what does phosphorus do in the sediment trap? What does it do out in the wetland cells? So we can start to modify the design to trap more of our pollution. We're looking at particle size distribution, so we can get these modeled in like P8 or wind slams, so we can have predictable reductions. And then hydraulics, we have the ability to keep the water for 2 weeks. What would that do? Like, so many unanswered questions. We had to wait till 3 years was over. So we hope to explore those. One of the questions we are looking at is the dissolved P piece, and working on a grant from Fund for Lake Michigan with UW-Milwaukee, Platteville, and Green Bay. All discharge now is being pumped to a surge tank, and then going through, we can test 2 different medias at one time on the outflow. So here we are, just getting the water coming in and then the water coming out. The difference is the reduction. Steel turnings, activated alumina, zeolite, those iron slag, those are all things that can be put in these pails and evaluated. And we're using Chad Penn's P-Trap software to do so. A couple of quick examples of other ways we've built ARTS already in the watershed. This is Brown County's project. They built 3 waterways. They did a wascob, and then that was just going to go traditional conservation. Will put that in the stream, and then it's done. But what do you do with all the cropland that's also coming here? Well, we added an ARTS at the end of the system because of the shape of the field. Halfway Creek, here we have a flashy creek system. So it pops, we take the water above the ordinary high, put it through the ARTS system, and then put it back in the creek at the end. Add another mini ARTS over here to trap 10 acres of ag land. And now this field is all in pollinators and native seeding. So kind of a good mix of different projects. And this is my last slide. Kevin wanted to get across like the correlation between soil test P on the bottom and then the water extractable phosphorus. Basically anything over 25 ppm, significant risk of losing dissolved P to leaching and runoff when it rains out. So I know that was a lot. We have a lot more data that I didn't even show, and that was kind of the point. Like, reach out, let's collaborate and try to solve this. I guess our goal is 0 discharge if we can get there. So I'll take any questions we have.
All right, Jeremy, we do have one question from Amy and Dane. She asked, what do you think the life expectancy of this practice is? I would say,
I mean, the life expectancy could be unlimited as long as you're keeping any type of dike, you know, free of trees, and basically following O&M. I think what's going to be critical is the practices above the device. If you're doing no conservation, like cover crop no-till, the amount of sediment you trap annually is, and we're talking 6 inches vertical of sediment that'll fill up in the sediment trap each storm event if you're not doing things on this. So the frequency of cleaning out, I think, changes more significantly than the life of the event. Basically, it's a stormwater pond, so it should be there forever.
Tina Barone, not really a question, but just she mentions it would be interesting to know the impact of these on groundwater. Any thoughts?
Well, this, I guess, our example, we have like 13. I think you have to be careful, right? Like, I think this is more your treatment system. So we have 13 feet vertical of pure clay, so we're not worried about interacting with the groundwater. But I would be, like any pollution, loading it up like a storm. You're going to want to do a liner or something and not let it integrate unless you know you have control over your source area.
Okay, we got time for one more question if somebody wants to unmute or type one into the chat. We have one in the chat. What capacity did you design the ARTS to capture? 10-year like standard states? Any problems with large storm events in recent years?
So it's designed to the 100-year to meet meadow condition and all storms below that. Basically, urban stormwater principles were used for the design. And we've never used the overflow. So I think adding the wetland, having the wetland portion of the footprint makes the pond plenty big enough that you can basically go over the 100-year. So we are looking at that, finding that sweet spot. You know, you're not always going to get an acre. If we got a half acre, how efficient would these be, type of thing. So a lot of unknowns, but a lot of knowns. And I would say it basically met the existing design standards that are out there for settling sediment. So that's encouraging. We don't need to reinvent that piece.
All right,
Well, that
thanks,
was,
Jeremy.
thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. I know it was a lot, and I appreciate you sitting through that.
And you did change your slides up quite a bit. So
Yes.
anyhow, all is good. You got done. And but you can tell Maria, the Dane County and Outagamie County had a lot to share. And now we'll see what Ashley has to share with us. This is our
Okay,
last
my-
presentation. Yes, there
Me
you
coming
go.
through?
Yep,
Perfect.
okay, thanks.
Okay, hello everyone. I am Ashley Vande Voort. I am the Douglas County Land Conservationist. And I want to start by saying that there are about 20 minutes left of silent auction. And I'm not at all offended if people want to multitask and place their bids to support youth programs. So today I'm going to be talking about the Douglas County Groundwater Testing Program. In reflection on the presentation that we heard yesterday, I want to clarify that this is not a research program, but how to start a sampling program. So kicking it off, if my slides will transition for me.
It's been a slight delay for everyone.
Apparently.
And you have your mouse.
Oh,
There we go.
Okay, so why did Douglas County start a water sampling program? So for starters, if you take a look at that somewhat grainy map that I have there, you can see that Douglas County is located in the very far northwestern corner of the state. And if you direct your attention directly east of Douglas County, that is Bayfield County. So a few years back, Bayfield County had a swine CAFO that was trying to start operating in their county. And when that happened, Douglas County kind of kicked into high gear because we don't have any CAFOs right now in the county and want to see what we could do to protect our resources here. So they started by taking a look at what we had for groundwater data and discovered that we really didn't have a whole lot of it. So you can see in that grainy map that there's only a few colored spots on that map showing that there weren't many samples. So that map is from about 2017, 2018, and it's from UW-Stevens Point. It shows what data they had on our groundwater, and they actually updated their online mapping system within the past year. So thanks to them, that map is no longer available for me to reference, but they did an awesome job of updating their system. So another goal that we had with starting this sampling program was to just inform citizens about the quality of the water that they're drinking, which is obviously important for their health, and to educate citizens about groundwater in Douglas County as a whole. So how did the program start? I can't take any credit for it. The program started before I started working with Douglas County, which was about 3 years ago. So the program started by Christine Oster, in the past land conservationist. And she started the program with some funding from Wisconsin Coastal Management Grant. And that funding was available to us because we're in the Lake Superior watershed basin. And when she started the program, she reached out and made some partnerships to make the program run smoothly. She got in contact with Douglas County Health and Human Services, and they helped us in one way by creating a video to show how to collect a water sample, which is that screenshot that you see there on the left-hand side. So they made a video to help with our testing process, and they also attended our educational outreach events. Another way that we partner with them is when we get the well test results back to us, we send any positive bacteria sample results to them, and then they can reach out to that well owner to let them know that they have a high bacteria test, and they advise resampling through their department because our Health and Human Services does offer a bacteria test for them. And then we also partnered with UW-Stevens Point Center for Watershed Science and Education, and we partner with them by they perform our water test analysis, and Kevin Masarek also provides education. He comes to the county and provides education for the program. So how we operate the program here in Douglas County, we focus it on once a year annual sampling event. At least that's typically how we do it. It's changed a little bit from year to year, but not a ton. So we start by doing a promotion a few months before we're going to have our sample event. We send out mailings, flyers, newspaper articles, Facebook to encourage people to sign up. And then our sign up process is mostly online now. We got that going a couple years ago so people can register online. We also make sure we list our phone number. That way anyone who doesn't have that internet access is still able to reach out and contact us. And we charge a $20 fee for every well owner who's getting their well tested. And that's a pretty good deal because we do the home odor and metals package through UW-Stevens Point, and the cost on that is $107. So it's a pretty low input from landowners, but I'm glad we can subsidize at that rate. And then it's our goal to get about 100 samples per year. And when it comes down to the actual sampling that we do with the landowners, we start by handing out the bottles, and we do that either at a single event to get them all there and pick up the bottles. Otherwise, with COVID the last couple of years, we just have them come into our office when they have time to pick up the sample kits. And then we have a single sample collection day. So everyone has to collect their sample on that day, bring it back to a drop-off location. We store the samples in a cooler overnight. And then the next day, we drive those samples down to Stevens Point to ensure that we don't have any issues with the shipping, because if it takes too long for the samples to get there, it's all a waste. So we take the time to drive them down there. And then after the well samples are analyzed, the lab will send out the results to all the landowners, and then we host an education session. That picture there is from pre-2020 when we could do the education session in person. We got pretty good attendance for it. The last couple of years we've done it virtually. And Kevin Masarek has hosted that program for us, and he just does a great job of sharing information. He goes through and he discusses what well maintenance people should be doing. He talks about our local groundwater here in Douglas County, and he'll hang around after the meeting and talk with individuals about their well test results and explain to them what they mean and clarify any concerns that they might have. And then our results that we're getting here in Douglas County. So again, you can see that somewhat old grainy photo of the past data that we had back in 2017, 2018. And on the right is a map that was created by our department here showing our well results as of 2020. So we can see that we've definitely contributed a lot of new groundwater data to the county, which was our goal. We create these maps to share the information about what our groundwater quality is, and we try to put a dot on that map that is big enough so that anyone looking at it can't view it on a house by house scale to keep that privacy in place. You can also see in that map that there's some pretty open areas still on the map. It is our goal to try to get samples in those areas. It's a little bit complicated because the population in those areas are much lower, and we've also discovered, especially in that southwest area that's pretty blank, there's a bit of hesitancy of working with the government on doing the sampling. So we've had to kind of fight that barrier. And then here is our nitrate nitrogen results from the samples. Thankfully, you can see by this map that we don't have the issue with the nitrate and nitrogen up here. All of our groundwater samples are below 10 milligrams per liter. So nothing exceeds the safe drinking water standard in the county, at least on the samples that we've collected. And one of the reasons for that is most of our agriculture is in the northern part of Douglas County, and the soils there are extremely clayey. So that kind of acts as a nice protective barrier to our groundwater. In the southern part of Douglas County, we have very sandy soils, but the agriculture is a lot less. So we don't have the impact in that way. What we are seeing with our test results is some natural contamination that we have. You can see on that map where you have the black and red dots, the F's and E's. That is around the area of the intersection of Highway 53 and 2, if you're familiar with this area. And what's happening in that area is there's a ridge of igneous bedrock, and Kevin thinks that the wells are tapping into some pretty old groundwater, and they're getting some natural contaminants in that area. This map here is showing total hardness, so we have some very hard water in that area. Other things that we've had in that area is some elevated arsenic levels, and there's other salinity's been high in that area. So that is one thing that we have figured out. And you can see that bedrock ridge kind of runs northeast through the county. You can see the trail of F's that go across there. So that's definitely an interesting thing that we discovered by doing this study. So long-term, what does this program look like for us? Honestly, I just do oversight pretty much on the program. Our land conservation technician, Cameron Birch, runs the program. And as far as funding, I mentioned at the start that we kicked off the program with some Wisconsin coastal management funding, but the county has actually kicked in and started funding the project with their capital project funds. And we get $10,000 annually to run this program, which we greatly appreciate. It is an annual application that we have to go through to request the funding, but so far the county has been very supportive of the program. And then another thing I did was I wrote this program into the Land and Water Resource Management Plan in 2019 when I updated it to make sure that that legacy is included within our plan. And then we also established a goal that we hope to start resampling people who had their wells tested 10 years after their initial sample. This will provide the county hopefully with some data of any changes in groundwater over time. And then we're also hoping that that will also provide an opportunity for landowners just to retest their wells and make sure that the water that they're drinking is of a safe quality. So if you're thinking about starting your own well testing program, start by thinking about what your goals are. Do you want to figure out if you have nitrates in your groundwater? Is it a situation like we had here where it's a lack of data? Is there concerns about natural contaminants that might be in the groundwater? Or is it the new emerging concern of the PFAS and PFOS? So just there's lots of issues that can pop up in groundwater. So make sure you identify those goals first. And next, as everyone knows, identify the funding, and that's always the tricky part of it. We were really lucky to be in the Lake Superior Basin where we could qualify for that coastal management grant in the start, and the county has been great at supporting our program ever since then. And then we also include a little bit of well owner buy-in with the program that helps support it. And I mean, something to consider is how much do you really want those landowners to contribute to the program to make it happen. And then last, I mean, think about what water analysis lab that you want to go with. There's lots of options out there. It's been wonderful working with UW Stevens Point. If you even just want to bounce ideas off of Kevin Masarek, I'm sure he'd be more than willing to work with you on that. And here's just some tips and tricks that I wanted to share to kind of wrap things up. So one thing is make sure when you start a program and you hand out your sample test kits that you provide very clear instruction of how to collect it. No matter how clear of instruction you provide, you're still going to get people who don't collect the sample right. We've had people dump out the acid of their sample test kit. We've had people collect it right away instead of waiting until our defined sample collection day. So clear instructions are extremely important. And then I have a note on there referring to that southwest corner of the county where we are lacking samples. There's kind of a fear of working with the government. There's a fear of what we're going to do with the results, and a fear of us actually making them correct groundwater issues if they do find something in their sample results, which is not what we're doing. This is purely educational. They can treat their water how they want to after they get the results. Another note, we've promoted this program on Facebook and it's been really effective. I think the first time we did it, we had about 50 people sign up within a matter of a few hours. So really good way to get people interested, but we also recognize that that is not including the whole population. So we make sure we try to promote through the newspaper. We've done mailings before, target mailings, trying to hit those areas where we're lacking samples. So we try to still hit a variety of ways. And then make sure you're ready to handle the data that you receive, because you can get a lot of it. We're doing 100 samples a year, so that's quite a bit of data. So having a plan for that before you dive in the program is good. And last but not least, Kevin Massard from Stevens Point has just been wonderful to work with, and big thank you to him for helping us with this program. So there's my contact information. Don't be afraid to reach out to me if you have questions on starting a program. And then these links should be getting thrown in the chat too, as a link to our well water testing website, which includes our test results. It has the webinars that Kevin hosted the last couple years. It has our collection sampling instruction video. And then I also have a link there for the UW Stevens Point Well Water Quality Viewer, which is a great place to start if you're curious about what the water quality is in your county. With that, there's the QR code. And what do I have for questions?
Actually, there's a question from Mary Jo in Ashland. Do you conduct the homeowners test kit or the metals kit as well?
It is both that we sample for, homeowners and metals.
And then, so what do you charge, Ashley? Or you said you charge $25?
$20 to the landowner. And the reason we picked that number is because our Health and Human Services Department charges $20 for just a bacteria test. So we didn't want it to be a barrier for people if they were getting their water tested. If they were getting it tested for bacteria and they could wait till our sample event, then they could get everything tested, all the full homeowner and metals package results for their test.
Yeah. So they get the homeowners kit and the metals kit, and they pay $20.
Correct.
So then you guys pick up
the remaining
like 90?
87, yeah, 90.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
And then, so Ashley, how much staff time does it take to implement the groundwater testing program?
I would say that we have 3 to 4 weeks of staff time that we're putting into this every year, in between putting together the promotion, working with getting all the well owners signed up, and then compiling the data afterwards. Cameron always puts together some maps of GIS, and we get those published on our website so that people have access to the data. And then also coordinating the education session that happens afterwards. So it does take a bit of time.
Okay. Question from Steve Richter. Do you make rounds to each of your townships to offer residents a chance to see the results and share questions?
I think before I started here, they may have done something like that. But what we've been doing since I started the position is we host the education session at a town hall that's kind of in the middle of the county. And we publish that in a newspaper so anyone can come to it. And then we send that out to everyone who actually had their water tested so that they can come to it. I have attended our Towns Association meeting, which is where all the town board chairs come together and meet. So I've presented at that before to promote the results and encourage people to participate in the testing, but I haven't gone to each township individually.
Okay, a question from Danny Santry from Calumet County. Did you hit your goal of 100 participants?
Normally we don't hit it, even if we get 100 people to sign up. you normally end up struggling with maybe up to a third of people who just don't get the results back into us, or they collected it wrong, or they forgot to collect the sample on that day. This past year with the COVID kind of messing with our funding, we actually did a double sampling and had a goal of 200 samples to collect. And we were able to collect, I think it was about 180. So I was really impressed that we had that good of a turnout with getting our samples back turned into us.
Another question, what time of year do you sample?
We normally do it in fall. We have done some smaller samplings in spring too, kind of as a catch up for any samples that we were shy of our 100 quota. We typically try to do it during the cooler months, just because the samples should be kept at a cool temperature, not frozen. So we're afraid if we do it in the middle of summer that we'd have issues with the water samples getting to form.
All
And
right, I don't see any other questions. Thanks, Ashley.
Another option for doing the sampling, which we've done with a few individuals, if they're interested in having their water tested and they can't wait until we host our actual event, the lab in Stevens Point will send them a test kit, and then they'll collect their sample and mail it back in for their own fee. And we've subsidized those too on a pretty limited basis, but we've supported that a little bit also. Okay.
Great, thank you, Ashley. And we're out of time. It's 12 o'clock. Everyone did a great job of their presentation. So thank you to Marie, Chelsea, Jeremy, and Ashley. And there's a QR code if you need that. And thanks, Tony, for being the assistant and doing all the chat questions. So you are off for an hour. We come back at 1 o'clock, and we're gonna then have outside the box, creative ways to leverage partnerships, funding, and resources to further conservation efforts. So please come back at 1 and enjoy your hour off. Okay, take care, everyone. Thank you.